Hello, and this is my face, and this is going to be more of a video where I have some thoughts rather than a lot of visual explanations to show you. So I thought it'd just be easier to be able to talk to you like this. But I don't have a big neon sign and my name behind me, so I don't think I qualify as a real YouTuber just yet. Anyway, we made it to the halfway point-ish of the season. While I've actually found it to be quite a lot of fun so far, it's fair to say there's been some criticisms on the table. From fans, from drivers. There's a lot of moaning. There's a lot of fun on-track action, but my goodness, there's also a lot of moaning. But that's F1, I think. Having a good old moan about everything that's wrong with F1 is part of the true experience of F1, including a nostalgia for a completely imagined perfect era where everything about F1 just worked. Okay, well, I've got a little secret for you. That time never existed. You go watch some of the old seasons and that were heralded as a time when F1 was truly what it was supposed to be, and I promise you, you will get bored and frustrated just like you do today. Because here's the thing, and I admit this thing is now true more than ever, F1 cannot be what you want it to be. It's an impossibility. And I'm going to try and demonstrate that for you in this video. There's a moment from The Simpsons that lives rent-free in my head where a deranged Mr. Burns wants Smithers to get into a model plane that he's built, to the point where he actually threatens his life to force him on board.
Now, to the plant. We'll take the spruce. Hop in. But sir, I said hop in.
Now we never see this scene resolve, which makes it all the more funny because there's obviously no resolution. Mr. Burns wants Smithers both alive and on the plane, two things which are in conflict with each other. So what do you want from F1? And because you can't answer that because that's not how videos work, I'm going to speak on your behalf, which means you may disagree with me. But I'm speaking in general points here that I see over and over again as fans and sometimes pundits bang their fists on the table demanding more from Formula One. And as an aside, I'm not on X, the Everything app, so God knows how toxic and ill thought out and furious the opinions of debate are over there. Frankly, I don't really want to know. But I see plenty elsewhere, sometimes from people who just seem to be watching through hate goggles these days. So let's start with our core tenet, okay? We want competitive racing. That's like the bedrock of this whole endeavour. We want drivers competing with each other in a fun, engaging way that shows off their talents. And this means we want it to be pretty close, right? Close enough that cars can battle each other and not be massively spread out from the fastest to the slowest. We want overtaking opportunities and a decent amount of them. It doesn't need to be every corner of every lap, but there does need to be some regular, achievable chances at taking positions if you're skilled enough. And this includes things like wanting less dirty air type stuff, right? Where it gets hard to follow the car in front for a long time because the aero wake of the leading car is so disruptive that the chasing car slides more, overheats its tyres, and can't hang on, let alone make any headway. Ideally, we also want the best drivers going head to head. It's a good season when you can say at the end of it, the best driver of this season has become the champion, rather than being like, this person won because the car was a second faster than anyone else, and Verstappen and Hamilton or whoever were stuck in a crappy other car. Now that's in an ideal world. The second major point, I guess, is we want flat-out racing. I am going to row this back in a second, but I've heard this point for years now, so I'm going to include it in the smorgasbord of F1 aspirations people seem to have. People keep saying, F1 should be flat out from start to finish. Less of this pussyfooting around. Less conserving tyres, less managing fuel levels, less managing temperatures, less managing battery charge and energy deployment. We don't want gimmicky things diluting the purity of the racing. We don't want performance dictated by the lifespan or temperature range of Pirelli tyres. We don't want energy starvation causing so-called yo-yo racing. We don't want cars underfueled so they have to pootle around for a bit to make sure they get to the end. This is all a nonsense when the drivers should just be pushing for all their worth and demonstrating their car control and racecraft at peak performance, lap after lap after lap. And I'm saying this a bit facetiously because I don't really believe it, but a lot of people do. And I'm not trying to shade you if you're one of those people. You want what you want. But do you? And that's really the point of this video. Because I do hear the appeal of wanting real, legit overtakes, not because one driver is low on battery or one driver is on fresher tyres. These are all gimmicks that subtract from true F1. Now, this really isn't meant to be mocking people who think this way or say these things, by the way. I'm aware this is a little bit how it sounds, but I'm just trying to express the desire people have for these things and hopefully not straw man any positions here. Not all of you are going to agree with these hypothesized positions. I'm not attacking you at all, even if I think this House of Cards end building is a precarious, impossible structure. Let's add a more minor thing to the wish list while we're thinking about batteries. Either get rid of the hybrid engines completely, or massively reduce the electric component and make them simple, cheap, effective V8s or V10s again. Noisy, powerful, uncomplicated. Now, I call this a minor thing because although the people that want this scream very, very loudly about it, much like a V8, I don't actually think everyone is tripping over themselves for it. It's not really the top of any shopping list. It's more of a delightful treat at the end if we get all the other stuff. I think if we asked people, do you want non-hybrid V8 engines or a super racy competitive field? They'd pick the latter. But I don't want to dismiss it or pretend people haven't been asking for it, so, there it is. And speaking of power units, I think people like there to be a healthy mix of power unit suppliers. It's good for F1's image if lots of engine people want to be involved. It's interesting for competition. It brings in money, supposedly. And let's be honest, F1 looks weaker when engine manufacturers leave. F1 and the FIA got down on bended knees to try and get new suppliers into the sport, eventually snagging Audi to their own unbridled glee. But they did also get Ford in a limited capacity, and they kept Honda from upping sticks. But considering the rather mixed reception this season has received this year, you do find yourself asking if all the transformations F1 made to itself to entice Audi were really worth it, not to mention Honda. It's kind of a question for another time, though. Anyway, so we got Audi. Yay! And by this metric, F1 is better for it. If you just ignore, this other metric while we celebrate that. So now we get to another core tenet of F1, technical innovation. One unyielding characteristic of Formula One is that manufacturers must design their own cars independently. Engines and gearbox suppliers can be shared, and obviously tyres are provided by Pirelli and brakes come from external suppliers too, but on the whole, most of the car must be the team's own design. You give them a strict set of rules, technical regulations that the car must adhere to, and within those you could do whatever you want to try and produce the fastest car possible. That's the formula. And a sort of subcategory of this, which I won't get into too much because it's less important and less coveted, is the idea that maybe the regulations are too regulated. By which I mean the rules around designing your car could be so strict and the margins so tight that there isn't a huge amount of scope for interesting design differences or innovative thinking. All the cars look fairly identical after all, and when teams do play in the loopholes and get creative in their interpretations, their designs are often banned the following season. You can see Ferrari's little exhaust winglet as a contemporary example of that. Just a tiny thing, but clever and legal and banned for next year. Not saying that's a wrong decision, but there's so little to see between cars these days that you can't help but mourn a little every time something interesting is blacklisted. I mean, clearly there are major differences between cars, as there's been as much as 5 seconds spread per lap between pole and 22nd in qualifying. But everyone is working inside a very narrow window here. Some people want that opened up. And there's some who say, you've restricted how much money and time they can spend developing the cars, so free up some of the actual design parameters. Because what we don't want F1 to be is a spec series, right? That goes against the tenet of original design. And sometimes suggestions are made that certain parts can be made spec to solve certain problems, and it sends shivers up people's spines. And look, by spec, just in case that's too jargony for you, I mean a part that's been designed outside of the team, so it's the same for everyone. So if you mandated the cars have spec front wings, everyone would have identical front wings. Formula 2 is a spec series because everyone has the exact same car, for example. So we've got to keep the beauty of relentless innovation in F1 by making sure it doesn't become a spec series, and possibly by not being so restrictive in its regulations where possible. So these are all our desires for F1. We've got some core non-negotiable type deals and some other desires that we'd really like if we can have them too. If only F1 could, pull its thumb out and achieve these things, we'd be well set. And to reiterate, these are not my wants. This is a summary of the general desires from frustrated F1 fans I've heard again and again over many, many years. They're nothing new. These are the things that will fix F1, and they're often deemed common sense. And so look, here's the thing. These things are fundamentally incompatible with each other without some sort of miracle lightning in a bottle type season. And let's start with flat-out racing. Let's imagine F1 being set up to go flat out the entire race. Drivers pushing their maximum every single corner, behaving near enough as if every lap is a qualifying lap. We hear this desire a lot. You give them all the fuel they need so they don't have to conserve. You give them tyres with a good working temperature range and rubber that maintains performance consistently across its life. And you give them an engine that doesn't need to charge up and deploy. It just delivers consistent, reliable power. Now, there's no excuses not to go as fast as you can from lights to flag. No need to conserve anything, just off you go. So then what happens? Well, there's an unfortunate conflict with this part, where we wanted no spec cars. All teams have to design their own chassis in competition with one another. Because inevitably, freedom in design leads to cars being separated by performance, with the fastest car at the front, slowest car at the back, with a staggering of performance from all the teams between. And so, what happens if all the races are just about driving this car as fast as possible? The faster cars pull away from the slower cars with no real way to overcome this difference. You'll just see 90 minutes of cars spreading out from each other. If the Mercedes is 0.3 faster than the Ferrari, then after 60 laps, it'll be 18 seconds ahead, roughly. Now, obviously, this is a simplification. The difference in the drivers alone will make up some of the difference in the cars. That will always be part of the equation, as it is now. But one massive thing that can give drivers a tool in overcoming deficits is strategy. And the differences in tyre compounds, their pace, the way they degrade over a stint, their different ideal temperatures, these create a space you can play in to do something different to your rival to outfox them if you don't have pure, outright pace over them. We see this all the time. Taking tyres longer to take one fewer pit stop might be the way to go. Stretching out a stint, or pushing like crazy on softer compounds to overcome the deficit that comes with needing that extra stop. Getting yourself into a position so your tyre life is offset with your rival at a crucial time so you can overtake them in the later stages. Look, don't forget, at the moment, in the real world, you still need to be half a second, maybe more, faster per lap than the car ahead to confidently pull off an overtake. Dirty air is a thing, so how do you manufacture that extra second of pace? Maybe by being on newer rubber or softer compounds at the right time. Okay, it's slightly impure because you're injecting variables to make one car advantaged over the other in certain phases, but it does increase the ability to race together. And this is the same with the battery charging and deployment this year, and to a lesser extent, previous years. Okay, maybe it's not perfect, and it could have been designed a bit better. But it is creating overtaking and fighting opportunities for those who can cleverly offset their energy levels with the car ahead, being able to attack when they can't defend, and vice versa. Now, I do admit, at the moment, it's a bit yo-yo-y. But it is a strategy like any other. It's part of a useful and potent arsenal. So, flat-out racing from lights to flag isn't going to produce the kind of races you perhaps want. Giving drivers variables to manage actually does help keep things interesting. And actually, look at other forms of longer distance racing, like in running and cycling. Managing pace is all part of the game. You have to be clever about how you deploy what you've got available. Cyclists have limited stamina, obviously, as they're human-powered, so they don't push flat out through most stages or races. F1 drivers have limited rubber and fuel, and it works in analogous ways. Now, I mentioned dirty air, which is something we all hate and has thankfully been a little less of an issue in recent years than in the decades gone by, but it is an issue that arises almost entirely out of this: teams having to design their own cars. And guess what? Teams aren't going to design cars that make them easier to overtake. You could get all the team principals in a room and they'd all say, we need to make these cars easier to overtake. Dirty air is a real problem, and none of them will go away and do it off their own back. You need to force them to do it. In fact, look at the ground effect era of 22 to 25. Through design regulation choices, F1 completely nerfed dirty air at the beginning of that period, and cars followed each other so much more easily in 2022. And then over time, teams started adding little aero bits everywhere, and the vortices and dirty wakes built up again, and the FIA really didn't clamp down on it, so following and overtaking got progressively harder. Of course, this is an issue that a spec series could easily overcome, right? If you designed one car that everyone had to use, you could make sure it had very clean airflow, minimal vortices whipping up a wake of air behind them, smooth, slippery bodywork. You could design that. You could fix that problem. I mean, you could also fix competitive racing issue with the spec cars too, right? If everyone is in the same car, then the best driver on the grid is never stuck in an ailing Aston Martin or a troubled Williams. You'd almost always have the best driver either becoming champion or having a thoroughly fair shot at the title. But no, things like field spread and dirty air are intrinsic outcomes of mandating every team design its own car. Overtaking will be harder, and you will sometimes get one of the best drivers in the field stuck in an Aston Martin, or a Mailing McLaren, or an Alpine. You just have to accept that. You can't have both. Now, what you can do, of course, is compromise. You can go hard on certain technical regulations to try and remove as many elements as possible that cause dirty air or overheating problems with following. And they have. Now, it won't always ensure the best drivers are in the cars worthy of them, but you do often tend to get both of these things floating towards each other over time. And in fact, as a bit of an aside to show a weird negative consequence of putting the best driver and the best team together, they sometimes cause a bit of a runaway feedback loop with each other, whereby if the best team has the best driver, the driver makes the team stronger by producing results and attracting more technical talent and money, as well as giving them more breathing room as they race away in the championship. And the team, being stronger, makes the driver stronger, giving them better results, which makes the team stronger, which makes the driver stronger, until suddenly you've had 8 championships on the bounce, for example. Not massively competitive, that. Now, for more detail on this, I did make a video ages ago on the problems of positive feedback loops in F1, which you might enjoy. Now, on a completely different note, I would also argue that wanting simple V8 engines and wanting a healthy range of engine suppliers aren't necessarily particularly compatible goals. Now, it's a trickier one to judge this as the shape of the power unit market is in a bit of flux, but in general, car companies kind of want to show off their modern, clever, electrified power units. As consumers increasingly switch to electric or part electric cars, using F1 to hype up a V8 engine, something that's basically as old as the woolly mammoth, isn't quite as useful as showing off how good you are at making a super competitive hybrid system. Now, it feels a little bit like we might be going back in that direction if the FIA president has his way, so we'll see how enthused Audi and Honda and whoever are about that. So, what is the lesson here? You can't have everything you want. You can't eat your cake and keep it, but you can compromise. You can eat a bit of cake and keep some of it for later. I don't really think the cake metaphor is going anywhere, but you understand what I'm saying. The thing is, F1 is compromise. That's all it's ever really been doing. It's trying to balance all of these things as best it can in order to output this competitive racing. This is the product. This is what's meant to keep you coming back week after week. Fast, competitive racing. And to do that, you have to give a little from everywhere else. Sometimes a lot, actually. No spec cars. Okay, but we will highly regulate them in an intentional and proficient a way as possible to force the kind of racing we desire. And we'll monitor the way that teams are trying to blossom free of our intentions and rewrite the regs accordingly. And look, I'm not saying I always agree with FIA clampdowns on innovation. I'm just saying I understand the intention. It's not an easy gig. You want hard, flat-out racing? Okay, well, it's not going to work if they do that all race long. It's actually going to take the fun out of it. But what we'll do is we'll bring in variables like tyre stints so a driver can push like hell at the appropriate moment to set themselves up for an overtake or to jump positions through the stops. So you'll get periods of hammer time within the race, but you'll also get clever race management, strategy and defense unfolding throughout the event. Am I saying F1 has got it right? No, I think there's definite issues this season and in most seasons where the competition hasn't been what it could be. And I think part of the problem with this set of rules is it's aimed to be much more lightweight while moving heavily to battery power, which left it starving for electric energy. If you want a big battery, it's going to cost you in weight. So they didn't. Another compromise, perhaps in the wrong balance. Now, I'm definitely not saying here that you wanting these things is wrong or stupid or naive. I think these are perfectly valid things to want from F1. I mean, this is what F1 sells itself as: competitive, innovative, the best of the best, foot to the floor. What I'm saying is they're not all achievable in full all at once. You've got to give a little to get a little. It's a strategy game where you've only got a certain amount of tokens to distribute across your power sets or something. I don't really play strategy games. Now, if I had any conclusion to make about all of this, there are no simple solutions to making F1 what you want it to be. You know, I'd often see pithy opinions thrown around like, all they need to do is X, and why don't they just do Y and that would solve it? And while I do often understand these ideas, you always need to remember that this is a complex, interacting web of variables that all pull on each other. You can't fix one thing without throwing another off balance. You can't have competitive on-track action and individually designed cars and flat-out racing and the best driver necessarily being able to win the title. Now, I will, of course, always welcome F1 and the FIA being more transparent about their decision-making when it comes to rules and regulations and explaining in detail the changes they make and the effects they expect in order to balance all these things in the best way. And I do live in hope that every decision they make is calculated and weighed in the consequences and compromises. And I mostly believe they are. But then I remember 2016 elimination qualifying, and I wonder if sometimes they are just flying by vibes. We focused more on rules and regulations today, and they've led to some very specific design choices now and historically. And you'll see some of these clever compromises everywhere in lots of technology. I was recently watching The Anatomy Of, a compelling series produced by Real Engineering, where they've 3D scanned tech you'll be very familiar with to explain layer by layer exactly how they're built and the clever little design choices involved. I really love the breakdown of the Nokia 3310 video, as that was my teenage phone, and it really helps you appreciate the effective, intelligently simple design that made it both affordable and legendarily indestructible. He even explains that sound that old phones used to make when they interfered with speakers. As of recording, there are 3 episodes out of the season so far, so you can also check out what makes a cheap charger worse than a fancy expensive one, and sneak a peek at Apple's engineering choices in bringing the iPod to market and changing the game forever. You can find The Anatomy Of exclusively on Nebula, where you'll also find my videos ad-free and with early access. Nebula, as you may know, is a prestige platform built and owned by its creators, producing and showcasing thoughtful, intelligent, crafted content across a wide field of genres, from science to pop culture, from history to comedy. There are lots of exclusive shows and series you just won't find anywhere else, and part of your subscription goes right back to the creators, like me. If you want to check out The Anatomy Of and explore all of Nebula's shows for yourself, you can get 50% off a Nebula subscription with my link, go.nebula.tv/chainbear. And that's just $30 a year or $2.50 a month. Click the link or scan the QR code and you can start watching right now. Hey, thanks for watching this video. I'm actually working on initial thoughts on another video about the calendar and sprint races, and would love to know your thoughts. I've published a short Google Form survey and would love you to fill it out. Link is in the description. Thanks.